Um, Hi everyone, welcome to ArtsFest Online. This afternoon we will be joining Stephen Snoddy in conversation about his career as an artist. This talk is the first in a series of online talks with artists and arts professionals about their work and practices. Each of our talks is conducted by a current MA student from the University of Wolverhampton and delves into important questions around art practices and the nature of creativity in the 21st century. Please use the Q&A box if you have any questions for Stephen, and we'll go through them at the end of the talk. And just a quick reminder that this is a public platform and the session is being recorded, so please don't share any confidential information. Welcome all. Over to you, Dean.
Thanks, Claire. So my name's Dean Kelland, and I'm the course leader for the MA Fine Art and MA by Research in Art and Design here at the School of Art in Wolverhampton. As Claire said there, we're delighted for our first online talk that we're joined by Stephen Snoddy. Stephen is an artist who was born in Belfast and studied at Belfast College of Art, graduating with an MA Fine Art before moving to Manchester in 1986. Stephen then got a postgraduate qualification in museum studies, and since 1987 he's worked at various high-profile galleries and worked with some really kind of big names in the art world as well. He returned to painting in 2013, and really that's kind of the focus of our conversation here this evening. We're really keen to get some insights into Stephen's return to painting and the kind of things that he's interested in terms of contemporary practice. As Claire also mentioned, one of the kind of key aspects of these online talks is that the discussion is between a contemporary practitioner and a current MA student. So I'm also delighted to introduce another Stephen, and that's Stephen Andrews. Stephen is a current MA Fine Art student who's a former architect and has returned to education, where he's developing a really interesting practice with painting himself, and he's interested in Stephen's work. He also studied at Belfast as well, so there's a common connection there. So without further ado, you've heard enough from me. I'll hand over to Stephen and Stephen. Thank you.
Hi, Dean, so I'll kick off. Yeah, hello everybody. I'm particularly interested in Stephen's sort of return to art, sort of having sort of done similar thing myself, though not to quite the same extent. I've got a number of questions along those lines. My first one for you, Stephen, is what led you to pursue art when you left school, and could you tell us about your art school experience?
Well, I grew up in Belfast, and my formative years were during the Troubles. And my father, Theo Snoddy, never went to university. He worked for all his working life at the Belfast newsletter. But he did become the art critic of the Belfast newsletter, and he wrote an art column every month. No, sorry, I think it was every week. So he would review exhibitions around Belfast, and he would write about art books. So from the mid-60s onwards, and particularly during my teenage years when I was studying art at school, my father would come back home with a bundle of art books about once a month, because publishers like Thames and Hudson, Phaidon, all the big art publishers would send him the big new hardback glossy books that had just been published for him to review. So if you remember, some of you will remember and some of you won't, the famous Hockney by Hockney book, which I think he has the blue and white striped jumper on, and I think it was published around about 1975. these were books as a 15-year-old that I was looking at voraciously when my father brought.
Oh, I think we might have lost you, Stephen. You've frozen.
Have I?
Oh, you're back.
I'm back.
Okay. Yeah,
Okay.
you're back.
There was a famous book called Private View, which was published in 1965 with photographs by Lord Snowdon and essays and text by John Russell, who was the art critic of the Evening Standard, and Brian Robertson, who was at the time the director of the Whitechapel. So that was a famous book which showed you what the London art world was like in the 1960s. You know, Bridget Riley, Patrick Proctor, Art Hodgkin, David Hockney, Anthony Caro, Robin Denny, and it showed you, you know, pictures of the Royal College of Art, of the tutors all having what seemed to be very long lunches at Chelsea Arts Club. You know, so it portrayed an art, a life in the art world, which to me, I probably first looked at this book when I was 12 or 13. I thought, actually, this looks interesting, you know, and that in a way put a seed in my mind that, you know, I wanted to be an artist. And then luckily I was very fortunate to go to a school called Friends School Lisburn, which was a Quaker school. And I was brought up within the Quaker tradition. And I had very, very good art facilities and very, very good art teachers, because they recognized that creativity was very important. Whereas most schools, I would dare to think at that time, didn't really rate art highly. So I had the sort of background with my father. I also have a twin brother who he went on to become an architect. So at, you know, 16 or 17, when you're deciding what you want to do, you know, your A levels, he decided to become an architect or study architecture, and I decided to go to art college. So I did foundation studies in the normal way, and then pretty much knew immediately I wanted to study fine art. And then our year, I think, in Belfast College of Art was an extremely talented year. I think I was very lucky in that the 30 odd students who studied fine art at the time, you know, I'm still in contact with 4 or 5 of them. One in particular being Elizabeth Magill, who had a big exhibition here at the New Art Gallery, be 3 years in September. So I pretty much knew immediately I wanted to be an artist. But the other fascinating thing that we used to travel over to see the John Moores exhibition, painting exhibition in Liverpool every 2 years. And I was the sort of guy at art college who would organize everything, you know, organize 6 of us to make sure we all traveled on the overnight boat, had a few drinks on the way, saw the show, spent the day in Liverpool, and then got the boat back again. So I was always organizing things for students, you know, to take trips to Dublin to go and see great exhibitions at the Douglas Hyde or other galleries. And I then did an MA fine art, and it was a fantastic experience because we had, as head of fine art at the time, a guy called Alistair McLennan, who's mostly known for his performance work, durational performances. But he was such a serious person about trying to prepare you as an MA student to become a proper professional artist when you left. So it's not that he needed to persuade me in any way, because I was a model student, even though I sort of look back and laugh a little bit now. But, you know, I genuinely was in there at 9 o'clock in the morning, and I was genuinely working there until 5, because we had, you know, given what students have had to cope in the last in the last year and possibly for the next year, if not longer. I was very, very lucky in that when I studied MA, we had me and a guy called Brendan Kelly, who lives in Brussels, who I'm still in contact with. We had a large studio between the two of us. Nowadays, you might find 12 students in that space. So we also had a materials budget, and we also had the choice of suggesting to the head of MA of visiting lecturers that he could then invite to fly over from London. So we had great, we had Richard Deacon over, we had Christopher Brun, we had Rita Donagh, trying to remember what other visiting lecturers we had, but there was quite a strong program at the time of visiting artists who would fly over mainly from London. And I think they were curious to know about Belfast, but also they got very well looked after. And the students were very, very appreciative of those, because you got to remember this was the early 80s when the Troubles perhaps wasn't as bad as it was in the 1970s, but there was still a lot of things happening. I mean, when I was at art college, there was the hunger strikes at the Maze Longcash prison. So, by no means were we out of the difficult situation that we were facing, or unpredictable times that we were in was happening when I was at art college. So art college was brilliant. I absolutely loved it, and it's in many ways I have a soft spot for all art colleges. I can recognize myself as an art student. I know the way the studios work, and throughout my curatorial career, working in different places all over England, I have always made connection with the art colleges of where I've worked, which is, in Manchester, in Southampton, in Baltic in the northeast, in Arnolfini, Bristol. I've always made contact with those art colleges and the staff within the art colleges to see how the gallery or the program I'm running and how we can work with the art students.
Yeah,
So,
sorry, I was going to say, I think that side of it is very important and very appreciated by us as sort of MA students, really, the link up with yourselves. I wondered if we could then go on to the next question, which is, I'm interested in how you revisited earlier work that had been set aside for some time as a spur to renewing your art practice. Did you see this earlier work as unfinished business that you had to get back to, or was it just a case of touching base with something familiar to get yourself motivated to get back into making art? And was there something in particular that prompted you to get back into making?
Yeah, I'll just try and dissect that a little bit. I'll ask was there something in particular prompted me to return to making art first? Because in 2006, I visited Christopher Brun's studio in South London. And as I had referred to earlier, Christopher made a visit to Belfast College of Art, probably in around about 1982. He had just won a prize at the John Moores. And he gave a very interesting talk about the dilemma between abstraction and figuration. And he himself has moved between the two poles. He's made very abstract work. He's made explicitly very figurative work, particularly with the winged horses, etc., etc. So part of my thinking when I'm running a program is that I always want to put in the program an artist fully developed, mature, but who might have been, for whatever reason, forgotten about. So Christopher Brun sort of fitted that bill in that he was an artist who hadn't had a museum exhibition for years. So I contacted him and I went to his studio in South London And this was a proper studio. And here is an artist who can paint, make sculpture, draw, printmaker. So he's got all the skills of all the old-fashioned, stuff. He just doesn't do one thing. And I've told him this, I think, subconsciously when I left that studio in Camberwell. I'm definitely convinced that was the time where I thought, you know what, I should make some work myself. I can't pinpoint it exactly, but I remember leaving the studio thinking, wow, what a great studio. So then we roll on, and then I did a big show with them in 2008. And then I had been saying to my wife, Sandra, do you know what? I want to make some work again. And then in Christmas 2012, she bought me some paintbrushes and paint. I also have to say I met my wife Sandra at art college. So she studied textiles. So we were coming from similar sort of backgrounds in terms of both of us having gone to Belfast College of Art. And then shortly after Christmas, I was back in Belfast, and my mum found this book of monotypes, which was 8 sets of 8, and the book was called 8 by 8. Deliberately so, because 8 by 8 is a palindrome. If you write 8 by 8 and you do a print of it, it turns out to be 8 by 8. So that was just my little joke. So she produced this hardback A4 64-page, well, it was 128 pages actually, book that I had published in 1981 in second year. And she said, I found this at the bottom of a drawer, and I opened it up, and it was as fresh. So this was 2013. So we're talking 32 years later. It was as fresh as the day it was made. And that is the absolute catalyst that made me then start some work. And what I then decided to do, because I was obviously a bit anxious about having not made any work for something like 25 years. So what I decided to do to give myself, to make it a bit easier for myself in a way, was to laser scan the monotypes. Just put them in a color photocopier, in other words, and laser scan them on slightly heavier paper. And then I painted over them. And that gave me a sort of way of getting the arm moving again, just mixing paints, just working with brushes. And that gave me a lift to be able to, rather than start with proverbial blank canvas or blank piece of paper. And the other thing I noticed is that when I set myself up to do this, I've always been somebody who, and even now, is before I start a series of work, I always prepare myself very well. So I'm not rushing around looking for paint. I'm not looking for the paper. I've got everything that's set, ready to work on. And I remember when I set a big table out to start these works, I set it out in exactly the same way as I did at art college. The colors were Richard of York gave battle in vain. Top left-hand corner of the table, had all my jam jars full of water, my brushes ready. So it was like getting on a bicycle again. And then what happened was, I set down 8 of the monotypes and worked over them. And in fact, it came back really, really quickly. And in fact, if you show the first slide, can you do that? The first image. Hello, is anybody there?
Yeah.
Okay, we'll come back.
The first image is up, Stephen.
Can everybody see it? Because I can't, but that doesn't matter.
I think that's the second one you've got now, Claire, actually. If you go back to the one that was up before.
Okay, sorry. There you go.
It's a blue painting.
Yeah.
Blue painting. Yeah, you see, if you look carefully at that painting, you can see that there's a monotype, a laser scan of a monotype underneath. I can't see the painting on my screen here, but so that painting's about A4 size, roughly. And So that gave me the confidence within which to get back to painting. And really what happened was, as I quickly grew more in confidence, I then basically started to work larger. But yeah, it was a little bit of 3, 4, 5 years of thinking about it. And then it was when my mum handed over to me my book of monotypes, that immediately that kick-started me into making work. And it was amazing when I started again, because it really, really was quickly. And once I set off, I was, off on a new creativity. I couldn't believe how long I hadn't done it for. And I think that period of 4 or 5 years of thinking about it, made me more, what's the word? More determined to carry on and more determined to make work. And then I got, so I didn't really see it as unfinished business, because the dilemma I had in 1987, when I graduated with an art gallery museum studies course diploma in Manchester, I was then offered the job of exhibitions organizer in Bristol, Arnold Feeney Bristol. And at that point, I had an exhibition that had already been lined up at the Arts Council Gallery in Belfast. And every year they invited, I think it was 3 young artists to show together as sort of young developing artists. And I had been offered that show, but then I'd moved to Manchester. I'd done a degree, a postgraduate. And then I'd started a job at the Arnold Feeney. I mean, to give you an idea how crazy it was, I mean, I finished my exams in Manchester on the Friday, and I started at Arnold Feeney on the Monday. So then I suddenly had to think, how can I do this new job at Arnold Feeney? And remember, I had no experience of organizing exhibitions. I was really thrown in at the deep end. And then I realized that I couldn't do both. I couldn't be what was at the time called exhibitions organizer, is now called curator. And sometimes, which I absolutely detest, that the idea that the curator is more important than the artist. Mother of God, as Superintendent Ted Hastings would say. So I then really, in early days of my curatorial career, decided that I wasn't going to make any more work. I couldn't be, in a way, the person behind the camera as well as the person in front of the camera. So I decided I would concentrate on my exhibition curatorial career, and that's what I did for the next, 26 years. But something inside me had always wanted me to go back to making work. So that's a rather long-winded way, but it sort of seeped into my brain, and once I started, and actually, if I'm being sort of really honest about it, I think by making my own work, actually made me make better decisions in my so-called museum life. And actually, I was able to, when you're in the studio, you don't have to worry about raising money. You don't have to worry about keeping politicians happy. You don't have to worry about staffing issues. You don't have to worry about, how you're going to put a program together when you've just been cut from local authority funds. So in a way, it was a relief or a release, because all I had to do when I'm in the studio is decide for myself, am I going to paint that red, or am I going to paint blue, or am I going to draw that line in, or, so in a way, it was a very good way for me to clock off from the day job in a way. And that is actually a very good lesson for anybody to learn. I mean, you might be a full-time artist, but what I'm saying is, if you go for a 20-minute run every day, that's a good way of releasing it from, my point is always try and do something else, which takes you out of the area that you're working in. Just try and do something completely different. So that's sort of why I got back to making work.
Claire, could you just move on to perhaps the next couple of images, just so people can see them, because yeah.
you got the diptych up? What have you got up? Is it a
If
green
you
painting?
go back, go back another one, please, Claire. Yeah, this is the second of the third images of the three images you gave us of the earlier stuff, which
So
is it's got the orange at the bottom, blue and turquoisey top, and orange motif at the bottom.
Yeah,
I think it's like it's another monotype sort of worked over actually.
yeah. That painting was developed actually when I was working at a table, and the light was shining through the window, and it created diagonal lines across the panel that I was painting on. And also, I've always been fascinated by works of art that have windows in it, or balconies, or pictures within pictures, like Velázquez, Las Meninas, or Matisse, obviously. So I've always been about the structure of the painting, and obviously Richard Diebenkorn and the Ocean Park series. So I'm always working with color, I'm always working with structure, and I'm always trying to make it the right painting. And sometimes the most difficult thing to do is to know when to stop. But yeah, so I was very quickly through 2013 to 15 making quite a lot of paintings, and I think I made in 2.5 years I made I know how many I made 115 paintings.
So
Many of those are quite small, but then I was offered an exhibition in Brussels, and I had to then start to work much larger. And that's where the ambition then increased somewhat in terms of size, because I realized that, you know, to sell work or to exhibit work in a large gallery in Brussels, I needed to work beyond the sort of A3, A2 size.
Could we have the next image, please, Claire? This one's the it's got the white in the towards the top left hand side, and quite a black bottom and a blue to the right at the top.
Yeah, that painting, there's often many times I do a painting and I'll then think, well, that reminds me of something, or it refers to something. And there's no doubt there's another painting very similar to this, which I painted either just before or just after. And when you look at Callum Innes's work, where he's actually taking paint off the surface, so he's got large sweeps of color, and then he will release turpentine down the canvas, which drains the color off. So there are certain references to certain artists that vary. 90% of the time, I'm looking at those references like after I finish the painting. But I mean, you know, the sort of artists I've looked at over the last 40 years have been William Scott, the Irish painter, Diebenkorn from the West Coast, Sean Scully, Callum Innes, Hans Hofmann, Matisse, obviously. And if you look through all of that sort of series of painters, they all are working with color in some way and structure. So I've always been a great person to, what, you know, in my little painting world, I'm always thinking about the tradition of painting. You know, where does mine fit in? I'm not saying that in a pompous way, in a way that you know, it will be important in the future. I'm just looking at it for my own point of reference. And obviously artists like Bryce Martin. And when I say a lot of these artists, they are artists that I've actually seen in the flesh. So when Bryce Martin had a very important exhibition at the Whitechapel in 1981, and I was in second year at Fine Art, you know, I've actually got 2 copies of the catalogue. I actually went to London to see the show. Now, you know, these days you can fly from Belfast to London, takes an hour, maybe an hour and 10 minutes. It might cost you 70 quid return. When I say I went to London, I got on a bloody Ulster bus, went over to Stranraer, then traveled all the way from Stranraer to London on a bus, you know, and saw a few exhibitions and stuff, and stayed with my twin brother who was in London at the time, and then got back and then came back again. So I think there is nothing that beats actually seeing art in the flesh. You know, and that exhibition in 1981 has stayed with me all these years, because it's all very well to look at Bryce Martin in a catalogue, but until you see that wax and encaustic surface and the color that he has made, because the colors are not really like anything, you can't get them out of a tube. He has this way with color that is almost, it's like he's dug the color up, you know, out of the earth. But also in 1983, when I have to say this wasn't planned, but we had a 2-week European trip, and I went with Tom Mallon, who was an MA sculptor, Brendan Kelly, who was an MA painter. So the three of us traveled to London first, and then we traveled to Europe for about 10 days. And on that trip, I arranged to see Bert Irvin in his studio in South London. Brendan saw Ken Kipp, and Tom saw Richard Deacon. Then we went on to Europe, and then in Dusseldorf, and this was not planned, but there was a Matisse retrospective on in Dusseldorf. And that was astonishing, because I managed to see a lot of those great paintings from the 1914-18 period, which John Elderfield, the English-born American writer, called the period of the means of production. So in other words, the paintings that Matisse did, like the studio paintings in Paris, the Notre Dame paintings, Open Window, Collier, I can't remember the name of it, but the paintings with fish bowls in. What he did in those paintings was to create them in a way in which you could actually work out the means of production. By that I mean, he didn't rub anything out. So all his paint strokes, all his additions, rubbing it out, alterations were all there on the picture plane. And that was, you know, to see those paintings in the flesh, and the big paintings like Piano Lesson and Moroccans. I mean, I think they're astonishing today. And these paintings are over 100 years old. So that was a revelation. And I remember coming back after the MA, and I remember then making some quite large monotypes. So, you know, I do think there's no substitution for actually seeing exhibitions in the flesh. And in one ways, it's easier. I think it's easier to get around these days. But given that the circumstances we're in, I think it's in other ways it's more difficult to afford to be able to travel around. You know, so I was very lucky in that I was able to see, and also another thing that happened when I was a student in second year at art college, Sean Scully had an exhibition at Belfast College of Art, and I wanted some work, paid work. So they took on a couple of students to hang exhibitions. That was kind of weird, because the guy that used to run the exhibition program for the Arts Council Northern Ireland, he sort of just let us do it. I mean, there's no way me and Kevin, my head of technical services here, would walk away and let students hang an exhibition. I mean, one, it wouldn't be safe to do it, and two, just the insurance implications. But, you know, I remember distinctly hanging a Sean Scully show, and I was aged about 21 at the time, if even 21. And I remember enjoying it. And then the exhibitions person from the Arts Council came back. He said, "Oh, that looks good." So these are all experiences which perhaps have moved me into the curatorial career. and then back into painting and then doing both.
Thank you. Perhaps we move on to the next question. You mentioned you got to a stage that you were producing sort of monotypes, and I'd wondered if you could tell us something about the 2016 monotype that you did, that we've got an image of. Perhaps Claire could move on to that one. Yeah. We've got the monotype up now, but I think Stephen is frozen again.
Sorry, I can't see it.
Oh, there you go. Yeah, it's your 2016 monotype, which is conversation 1.
Yeah. Okay. So what I did was, after I had a big show in Brussels, I decided not to do any more painting for a while, and I decided to return to the thing that got me back to painting, which was making monotypes. And I actually made 8 sets of monotypes. This conversation was based on the famous painting by Matisse called Conversation. I made all these in the evening in Walsall when I was staying overnight in Walsall. I was in a house which had a big room, and I was able to make all the monotypes in Walsall. I live in Manchester. And what I did was I chose, I think it was 8 Matisse paintings. And I had a large color photocopy of the Matisse painting. So the color photocopy of Conversation is the same size as the monotype. I put that on a table. I then put a piece of glass exactly the same size as the color monotype. And then I painted over the glass because I could see the Conversation painting underneath. And then I made 8 monotypes of that painting. Now, obviously, when you do a sequence of 8 monotypes, number 8 is completely different than number 1. I also, when they all dried out, and when I was making the monotypes, they're very simply made with oil paint on glass, and then a piece of paper laid over the top and just rolled over by hand. So no complicated presses, no proper Japanese inks or anything, just simply glass, oil paint, piece of paper, and a hand roller. So when all 8 dried out, I then hand colored a lot of them.
Are you still with us, Stephen? If you just bear with us whilst we just get the speaker back.
Hello?
Yes, we can hear you now.
Yeah, sorry, I went off screen there for a bit. Okay. So this is Conversation 1 on the screen. Well, Conversation 8 is totally different. And if you look at the painting, Matisse painting, obviously because this is a print, this is a reverse of the original painting. So that's what led me into doing monotypes, was basically to return to the medium that got me back into painting. Okay, I'm conscious I don't want to talk too much if people want to ask me questions.
Yeah, thank you, Stephen. That was fascinating to hear how it was sort of back to basics, really, and just really getting to the nub of it rather than anything too complicated. I've read that your earlier paintings reference architectural elements, and I think you mentioned earlier that windows sort of featured in some of them. And I, as an architect, that sort of resonates with me. But I wondered if you could expand a bit on the sort of the architectural references in some of your paintings.
Yeah, I think I've always been an artist that has always had some sort of structure to their work, whether it be paintings, drawings, or whatever. I've never been a sort of an expressionist. You know, I've never really made work that sort of just, you know, is messy. I've always felt I've needed something to hold it together. And that might be to do with my interest in architecture. You know, I've often felt, as Diebenkorn once said, you know, he sort of said that the perfect painting is when everything is in its right place. By that he meant structure and color. And I suppose that's maybe just within my personality, is that, you know, I feel that, you know, a work of art has to be held together. You know, a painting is a bit like a building. You know, it needs to have a roof, it needs to have foundations, it needs to have walls, it needs to have floors, etc., etc. So I don't think there's any work that I've ever made in my life, and I include even at school, which has not had some sort of structure to it, some sort of internal structure. And I can't really answer the question why, is to maybe say that I've never had the inkling really of being a wild expressionist. There's always got to be something that's held back or constructed or held together, or where the parts all interlink. So, you know, it is a picture that is made up of various parts that all sit together, is the best way I can answer that.
Yeah, great. No, I can certainly identify with that. One of the things you've mentioned along the way is Dabenkorn, and I wondered if, having seen, I saw an exhibition back a few years ago at Hepworth, Wakefield, actually, of Howard Hodgkin, and in seeing it, sorry, looking at your paintings, I just suddenly thought it reminded me of that. And I know it's probably much more expressionist than yours, but there was just something about the uninhibited sort of handling of colour, really, which made me immediately think back to Hodgkin. And I know you mentioned him earlier on as being one of the artists that you went to see in London. So I wondered if you recognised that he'd been an influence on the way you sort of handled your painting.
Yeah, sorry, Stephen, you were breaking up a little bit, but
Oh,
I'll answer the question as I think you were asking. Actually, if you look at Howard Hodgkin's earlier paintings from the 60s and early 70s, I actually prefer those to the paintings that he was making up to, you know, the last 10, 15, 20 years. I mean, the thing about Howard Hodgkin is, in a way, the paintings are almost too beautiful. You know, it's like every Howard Hodgkin exhibition I've seen, I've loved, but they seem to have a sort of little bit of English politeness about them, you know, and I've just always preferred the more structured sensibility of Diebenkorn. So while I've always admired Hodgkin as a painter, you know, I do feel that he's sort of polite English color abstractionist is the best way I can say it. But if you look at his early paintings, they've got a lot more structure. And actually, if you look at his early prints are brilliant. I saw some in Frieze Masters about 4 or 5 years ago. I thought they were absolutely wonderful. When he's using screen print, where again, you probably have to be a bit more structured, you know, because you're doing different layers and different colors. So in fact, I really like Howard Hodgkin's early screen prints and some of his 60s paintings.
Well, thank you. Could you talk a bit about your more recent work with pastels? And could you tell us, is that part of an ongoing series? I mean, I get the sense from what you said that a lot of your work is you sort of tend to work on a series of work, and the ones that we're looking at are probably just a selection of those. But yeah, perhaps you just talk about those pastels. Claire, could you perhaps put up the next slide? That's one, thanks. This is the first of the two pastels, which has got a sort of a large orange triangle at the bottom, actually, to identify it.
I've got it. Yeah. So what happened with the pastels was, again, around about 2016, I visited Chantal Joffe's studio. And we acquired 4 pastel drawings from Chantal for the collection here in Walsall. And the pastel drawings, her drawings were absolutely fabulous. So I asked her about what pastels she was using and what she was doing them on. And she said, well, of course, I use Sennelier pastels, which are the same pastels that Degas used in the 19th century. And then she showed me some pastel board. And for some reason, pastel board had passed me by. But pastel board is like a very thin sandpaper in which when you drag the pastels over, it grips. So the pastel color actually sits on the surface. And her pastels were unbelievably brilliant in terms of the way that she used the color, etc. So this was after I'd done the mono prints. So I then decided to start working. What I actually did was I printed off some of the original monotypes of 1981. And then I started to work on pastels over the original laser scans. And again, this was a way for me to be able to make a series of work and have something to start from. And at the minute, I'm up to something like pastel number 95. So this pastel here, which is on the screen, I did only about 3 weeks ago. So, and on the last, we'll say for the middle of March to the beginning of April, for about 10 days. These are about A4 size. I did 3 pastel drawings a day for 10 days. I did 30 pastel drawings, 3 a day. And that was a sort of discipline for me. And when I'm painting, I generally am painting something which refers to the painting before. So I might work on 4 paintings at one time, but with these pastels, what I did was I did 1 pastel. I put it into a paper envelope, put it away, got another piece of paper to work on. So deliberately did not have any of the previous pastels to refer to, because I just wanted to be actually quite quick and not be very thoughtful about what color I was putting down. It was I deliberately was making these very quick. So I did 3 a day for 10 days. I did 30 pastel drawings in 10 days.
Could we have the next image, perhaps, please, Claire? Which is another pastel. Sorry, we'll just get another pastel up there, Stephen. Which is
yeah,
it's got like a yellow 7 at the top of it. If you like.
Yeah. I mean, that's the same size as the previous one.
Yeah.
I actually, the way I photographed them was I made a little shelf from a piece of frame, painted it white, because pastel drawings are very awkward to handle because the pastel still comes off in your hands. So what I did was I put the pastel drawing on the little shelf and then photographed them, so I didn't have to handle them very much.
So you don't fix them then, Stephen?
No, I will only fix them if I sell them.
I see. Okay.
And that will just involve a very quick spray of fixative. I don't do the reason why I didn't do it was I didn't want my studio to smell too much of fixative, so I thought I'll fix them if I sell them. But also you have to be careful with fixative in that it actually can't change the surface, so you almost need to lay them flat and let the fixative drop onto the page, not spray it directly at 90 degrees to the drawing, because actually it can leave a sort of sheen on the surface.
Yeah, perhaps we move on to the next question now, which I think you've dealt with a little bit along the way, but you're after Matisse paintings. I wondered if they were based on a particular Matisse experience. Well, I think you've answered that already. That you saw those Matisse paintings, and I wondered if.
I did.
Yeah, well, my question was, did you reckon Matisse reflected the direction you were taking anyway, and go with it, or did actually Matisse itself get you going in that direction?
Well, what happened was I decided, I think around about 2017, to make paintings that directly referred to Matisse. And any work that I make that directly refers to an artist, in the title, it'll always say in brackets, after Matisse or after Velasquez. Because I had a discussion with a friend of mine, an artist friend of mine, and I said, should I refer to my source in the title of the work? And she said to me, she was somebody who I went to art college with, you know, so I've known her for over 40 years. She said, but you were always talking about other artists, Stephen. You were the one who knew more about art history, contemporary art than anybody else. So I then made a deliberate decision that I would start to make work about a particular series of Matisse paintings. And this is based on the Piano Lesson, the famous painting in the Museum of Modern Art. And then what happened was I then just did a whole series of paintings, which ended up being 24 paintings. And then I had an exhibition in London, which included these paintings, not all of them, but most of them. And I had a catalogue which was called Homage. And of course, it was homage to Matisse. So then I just stopped, because I think 24 paintings on this subject was enough. And then I moved on to making, you know, more paintings, more abstract architectural paintings. So I've always worked in series, and you know what I've actually developed, which is actually quite a good strategy. So I have my pastel drawings, I have my monoprints, I have my paintings, and I have my works on paper. So I've got like 4 discrete areas of work. And what I'm beginning to do now is to work in bursts. I'll do a series of paintings. Since I've did the 30 pastels, I've done 8 paintings in the last sort of 3 weeks. So, you know, I'll move from one to the other. And I think as an artist, it's very good to have different aspects of your work. If you look at Sean Scully, I mean, he's got the big paintings he does, but he also does etchings, gouaches, pastel drawings, etc. It's also just, you know, a good way to switch materials, switch speed in a way, you know, because all the pastel drawings are very quick. You know, I'm really just working very quickly on them. The monotypes are a bit slower, and the paintings are a bit slower. The one thing I haven't tackled, which I'm slightly afraid of at the minute, is to actually do some work which is just black and white or black, white and grey. So to actually do a series of work which has got no color in it. So that might be something that I will tackle at some point.
Great, that'll be. Thanks for that fascinating insight into your sort of the working part of your practice. It's I think it's what we as students sort of most want to hear about, really, the nuts and bolts of it, and that was very, very useful. I don't know whether we're set up to take questions from other people attending, but perhaps if we are, we could invite questions from other people watching.
Claire, is there any questions that people have put in?
Hi, I'm going to have to stop sharing my screen to check that.
Okay.
Okay.
But I mean, the most important thing really is to keep making work, you know, because without your work, without making something, you haven't got anything. The other thing I should say, which is incredibly good advice for artists, for young artists, and you know, when you graduate, etc., never ever apply for an exhibition to a gallery or a space that you've never visited. I mean, we get applications, we get proposals, obviously not in the last year, but we get proposals all the time at the New York Gallery. And you know right away they have never visited the New York Gallery. And in a way, why should we offer an exhibition to an artist who actually hasn't visited the New York Gallery? You know, in a way, it's a bit rude. But the point is that if you visit a gallery, you will know if that's the right space You know, so for instance, let me give you an example. So if you've just graduated and you've been working for a couple of years out of art college, so you're, you know, you're still a young developing artist, you would not make an application to exhibit on our 650-meter square space. You would prove to us that you'd visited the New Art Gallery if you say something like, I saw the 4th floor space and I have a project and this is the project to fit that space. So you've got to indicate to the people that you're making a proposal to that you know what the program is about, you know the spaces, and that you're tailoring something that fits those spaces. And also it's good to visit galleries and spaces and see how they operate and you know, and see what the flavor of the program is. Because obviously on the 4th floor, you know, we have used that for younger developing artists in the West Midlands. And that's the space that people should really be making a proposal for, you know. So that's just a piece of advice for you guys who are, you know, trying to plan what's going to happen when you graduate.
Okay, Stephen, we have one question coming from Simon. He asked, I'm interested in the reference you made about a picture in a picture. Could you expand on this?
Yeah, if you take Las Meninas by Velázquez, which is one of the most famous paintings in art history, you'll see the artist at the canvas, and then you'll see a doorway in the background, and it is reputed that the silhouette of the figure in the doorway is Velázquez himself. And what you see is basically a picture. Well, not only do you see a picture within a picture, but you actually see the back of a canvas. So it's an old trick that windows in a way in a painting are another painting within a painting. You know, so what you see outside almost forms, the window is like a frame onto another image. And when Richard Cork wrote the catalogue essay for my book in 2016, he asked me a very simple question. He said, are you inside looking out or are you outside looking in? And I said to him, actually, I'm inside looking out. And in a way, looking at some of my paintings is taking up that position of looking at a painting, but then looking out past the painting, which may then be that window reference within the painting. And that's why the exhibition I had in Brussels was called Looking Out. I just think it's a very, it's part of art history that there are always paintings within paintings. You can always take a section of one painting, which then might then refer to another painting or be seen as a separate painting within a painting.
Okay, we don't have any more questions at the minute, but Stephen, do you have any more that you want to pose to Stephen before we go?
No, that was my that was the questions that I prepared anyway. So you know, I'm sort of happy with that answer.
Fabulous. Stephen, is there anything else you want to add to that? Stephen Snoddy, I'm getting confused with two Stephens here.
Yeah, I think that really, you know, you've just got to keep making work. You know, even if that's modest in scale, you know, whether it be small works on paper because of your circumstances, you don't have a studio or you're working in a spare bedroom, or you're working in your own flat, you've got to just keep making work. You know, it's a bit like I played a lot of sport when I was younger, and you know, it always used to be that the harder you practice, the luckier you got. And it's a bit like that with art. You know, the harder that you make, you know, you keep making work, that's only going to put you in good stead. You know, because if you don't make any work, you've got nothing to propose for yourself. And I think just for yourself, you've got to keep making the work. You just got to. I mean, I'm actually amazed that I didn't make any work for 26 years, but my God, mother of God, I should say.
You're making up for it
Mother
now.
of God. And the wee donkey.
Yeah. A great Teddism, a great
Yeah.
Teddism.
Yeah, I mean, I'm sort of making up for lost time. But actually, you know, people do say to me, Stephen, how do you do your day job, which is running the New York Gallery Walsall, and then make all of this work that you're talking about? And I actually say to myself, it's actually, I wouldn't say it's easy, but you know, you in a way in 2013 when I decided to make work, I just became selfish. I just said, you know what, I'm going to do it. I did. I think perhaps for many years I did worry about the idea of me being an artist, how other artists would think, and not only that, how other directors or curators of other art galleries would think, oh, well, look at Stephen, he's pretending to be an artist. But actually, what really happened was I just said, fuck it, I want to make some work.
I'm going to do it. Yeah.
And do it. You know, that's exactly what happened. And obviously, you know, when I made the work, I'll tell you. I'll tell you this quick story, anecdote. In fact, the people who've been most supportive of me in my work as an artist have been other artists. They've been fantastic. So I was at the Royal Academy summer exhibition dinner in 2018. It was the 250th anniversary. And it was a big deal to be there. But the reason why I was there was because Christopher Brun, the guy I mentioned earlier, who did a big show with in 2008, he was now the president of the Royal Academy. So, you know, and I kept in contact with him. I still keep in contact with him. So he invited me to this big dinner in London. And all the Royal Academicians were there. And then when you have coffee afterwards, you then go and have a coffee in one of the galleries. And Fiona Ray was there, abstract painter, YBA, and Gary Hume, YBA, abstract painter. Well, not so abstract, actually. We were having a coffee together, and Fiona said to Gary, by the way, Gary, did you know that Stephen's a painter? And Gary sort of laughed and said, oh, yeah. So anyway, I said, yeah, no, I'm back painting again. And I gave him my card. And I said to Gary, and I like Gary's work and I like him. I said to him, I'd like to make a studio visit in London. So we exchanged emails, we exchanged addresses, and I sent him the catalogue, my Looking Out catalogue of 2016. So I sent it to his Hoxton address. And then I got an email back from him saying, thanks very much, Stephen, for the catalogue. You are so bloody annoying because you damn well can paint. I thought you would be a rock star painter. And by that, what he meant was like Bob Dylan, who's a terrible artist, and other of those rock stars. What do you call him? The Rolling Stone guy that paints. Forgotten his name.
Ronnie Wood.
Anyway,
Ronnie Wood, yeah.
Yeah. He thought I was a Ronnie Wood or a Bob Dylan. And Gary Hume said to me, oh, you know, and then I emailed him back and I said, well, don't be copying me, Gary. So it was just great to have that sort of humorous exchange. And Gary, you know, Gary was great. I went to his studio and we had a chat, and it was like, you know, I mean, Gary Hume. He's a great artist, a lovely guy. And he was treating me just like a peer, like a group, you know, and a painter, you know. And I thought, and other artists have been fantastic, you know, who've just been really, really supportive. And actually, when you get to it, I don't really care. I'm just going to make the work, and that's the important thing. I don't. I mean, I don't know if any of my staff are listening, but my staff don't take any interest in it whatsoever. But to be honest, I think that's fine, because, you know, I've got to work with them on a day-to-day basis, and they're probably thinking, I don't really want to criticize Stephen's paintings, or I don't want to tell him that he's great either. So, but that's fine. I'm absolutely, you know, in a way, it's better to keep it. I do keep it separate. I'm also quite disciplined in keeping what I do in my painting art career separate than what I'm doing here in Walsall. You know, I do try and keep a distance between the two, and that works very, very well. But I'm genuinely surprised that the most support I've had has been from other artists, and that's been fantastic.
Great. Could I just say a massive thank you to both Stephens. Stephen, for taking your time to come and talk to us about your work, and for Stephen to be the first MA student to step in and do the questions. I think it's been a really interesting discussion there, and really great. And if you would like to follow Stephen on Instagram, it is snoddy.stephen that you can with a PH, that's correct. And you'll be able to see more of his work as it develops by following him there.
And if anybody wants to send me an email, and ask me any questions, my email address, and Dean, you can send this out to anybody who might ask you, is Stephen with a PH .snoddy@walsall.gov.uk. Stephen.snoddy@walsall.gov.uk. And I'm very happy to answer any questions, anything about what we do in Walsall or my art, or, career advice or anything at all. So you can just bang me an email.
That's brilliant. Thank you. Thank you for that, and for spending your time with us this afternoon.
No problem.
Do I hand over to you, Claire?
Yeah, just to reiterate what Dean said, Stephen, thanks so much for sharing your professional practice, your career. It's gold to other artists as well as students, and it's just really great to hear it. So thanks very much for joining us. Hope you can come back again.
Enjoyed it very much.
Thank you. Well, we hope you enjoyed that at home. Our next ArtsFest Online event is tomorrow, Wednesday, the 28th of April, with director, screenwriter and journalist Charlie Swinburne. You can book for free through Eventbrite, and we hope to see you there. Thanks for watching. Bye.
Take care. Bye.